During the Renaissance, the idea of a structured work week as we understand it today, typically Monday through Friday with weekends off, was far from established. Instead, the rhythms of work were closely intertwined with the seasons, religious observances, and the agricultural calendar, revealing a complex relationship between labor and leisure in early modern Europe. Far from working an unbroken stretch of days, people's workloads ebbed and flowed with natural cycles and spiritual schedules, producing a work routine quite unlike the modern notion of a 5-day workweek. Seasonal labor was perhaps the most fundamental determinant of how many days people worked. The majority of the population during the Renaissance lived in rural areas, where agriculture was the backbone of the economy and daily life. Farm workers, peasants, and rural artisans had to adapt their work schedules to the demands of planting, growing, and harvesting crops. The intensity and length of the working day shifted dramatically across the year, with some periods nearly devoid of work, while others required near-constant labor. For example, spring and summer months were the busiest. During planting and harvesting seasons, peasants often worked long days, sometimes from dawn to dusk, to complete crucial tasks before weather conditions became unfavorable. In contrast, during the cold winter months when the ground was frozen and crops were dormant, workloads lightened considerably. People might spend shorter days engaged in tasks like repairing tools, maintaining buildings, or preparing firewood, interspersed with more leisure or social activities as the weather limited agricultural labor. This cyclical pattern meant that the workweek could vary not only in length, but also in intensity from season to season. Overlaying this agricultural calendar was the deeply ingrained religious life of Renaissance societies. The church played a central role in communal and individual rhythms, and religious observances heavily influenced how labor was structured. One important facet of this was the practice of observing saints' days and holy days as days of rest. Each locality typically had a patron saint or multiple saints whose feast days were celebrated annually, and these occasions were often marked by mandated work stoppages, festivals, and public ceremonies. Saints' days, along with other religious holidays, created a surprising number of official days off. In fact, estimates suggest that in some parts of Europe, especially in places like France, Italy, and England, the total number of feast days and holy days could number more than 50 annually. These days were effectively public holidays, during which most forms of work were prohibited or discouraged, both out of respect and in accordance with church laws. This meant that a typical Renaissance worker might expect at least 1 day per week off, plus numerous additional holidays throughout the year. The Christian calendar itself was punctuated by a host of such days, ranging from major events like Christmas and Easter to lesser-known saint feast days. For the average person, this was not just a matter of religious observance, but a social and economic reality. The requirement to cease work affected trade, market days, and agricultural output. Often, these holidays were celebrated with fairs, markets, communal meals, and rites that reinforced social bonds and local culture, intertwining rest with recreation and spiritual renewal. The tradition of taking time off on saints' days and holy days also illustrates how early modern European societies were quite different from the industrialized world that would come later. The impulse to separate work and leisure into fixed blocks of the week, such as the modern weekend, was not yet a cultural or economic priority. Work was meaningful and necessary, but was balanced by the rhythms imposed by faith and nature rather than clock-bound schedules. In addition to saints' days, the Renaissance calendar featured numerous feast days, fast days, and penitential periods. Some of these, such as Lent, involved restrictions on certain kinds of work or food, but may have affected labor patterns in more subtle ways. For instance, artisans and merchants might adjust their activity or rest during these times in response to community observance, even if not compelled by law. On the other hand, major festivals or carnivals often occurred just before penitential periods, serving as social occasions that further punctuated the calendar with pauses in routine labor. To get a clearer picture of the impact of these religious holidays on work patterns, historians have often examined the surviving records of guilds, municipal councils, and church authorities. These documents reveal frequent regulations governing when craftspeople, merchants, and laborers had to cease work, not only on Sundays, but on a range of other occasions. Guilds controlled much of urban production and trade, enforcing rules about rest days to align with religious and civic expectations. This organization reinforced social order and provided a measure of predictability in busy towns and cities. The observation of saints' days and feast days also influenced the development of social customs and expectations around rest and recreation. Public holidays became a time for communities to gather, celebrate, and affirm shared values, which in turn shaped the cultural identity of Renaissance Europe. This blurring of the line between sacred and secular helped to embed a sense of collective rhythm that defined when people worked and when they rested. One might assume that people working long hours and hard days would have little room for rest, but in reality, the Renaissance era featured substantial amounts of holiday time within the year. In many ways, the sheer quantity of non-working days was higher than what we might expect today. The combination of Sundays, saints' days, and other religious festivals added up to roughly 1/3 of the year spent in mandated rest and celebration in some communities. This reality meant that Renaissance laborers, whether farmers, artisans, or merchants, experienced a workweek that was markedly irregular and punctuated by frequent days off. While the work might be intense and demanding around planting or harvest, the calendar guaranteed time away from labor for reflection, festivity, and socializing. Such rhythms were not only practical adaptations to agricultural and religious cycles, but also a reflection of broader societal values that emphasized harmony between work, faith, and leisure. In conclusion, the Renaissance workweek cannot be understood in terms of the fixed, modern concept of 5-day working weeks and 2-day weekends. Instead, it was shaped by agricultural seasons, religious observances including saints' days, and an abundance of public holidays that punctuated the year with frequent opportunities for rest. This complex interplay created a labor rhythm that was remarkably different from our own, reflecting a world where work was integrated with the natural environment and spiritual life in ways that informed social order and cultural identity. Understanding these patterns offers a clearer picture of everyday life in Renaissance Europe and reminds us how historical work habits are deeply rooted in the interaction between nature, religion, and culture.